Hello and welcome to this special local election results analysis episode of the Lib Dem Podcast and the Never Mind the Bar Chart podcast. I am still Lancashire County Councillor John Potter for at least another few years. And obviously, with us, we have our fantastic panel to kind of look at everything to do with the local elections, but really importantly, where we go next. What are the consequences? Because whatever you think of these local elections, whether you think you're in despair, whether you are happy, whether you're completely indifferent, they are seminal and they are going to change things going forward. So on our panel, we have, of course, party president and Lord now, Mark Pack. How are you doing, Mark?
Lovely to join you again, John.
And we have another Lord, Lord Shaff Mohammed. Hello, Shaff. How are you doing?
I'm fine. You get two for the price of one.
Yeah, and not just in terms of laws, we've got Yorkshire people as well. And obviously joining us from Barnsley is Hannah. How are you doing, Hannah?
I'm good, thank you.
And he returns, the man who started it all with me, getting near his end of his mayoral year. Richard Kemp is back. Hello, Richard.
Nice to meet you all again. I feel I need to get back into the fray, so I'll try being rude to you lot for a start.
Excellent.
Okay, and for listeners that don't know, we absolutely will have an edit button, and so none of it will make it through. But I suppose I always start this after when we do our local election analysis. That yes, even when Lib Dems have fairly good results, we do know there'll be Lib Dems out there that put their heart and soul into contests. Maybe didn't get what they wanted. It's certainly one of our candidates in Preston threw everything at it and didn't quite get over the line. Or sometimes Lib Dems may have lost their seats as well, or local parties didn't quite have the breakthrough they're after. So, but whoever you are, whether you're a paper candidate, successful candidate, or whatever, thank you on behalf of the party for standing. It really does matter. But we will go straight to you, Mark. I suppose the question is, why did these results happen as they did? Were you expecting a reform landslide of that magnitude?
No, but I was expecting the Lib Dem results to be, along the lines of what we achieved, which isn't in any way to downplay them. It was a really cracking set of results. But I think, what I was saying to people all the way through the campaign, they're asking me about, how's it going? How's reform going to do? Was it looks like it's going well for us. But so much of the reform story is sort of outside the areas where we're most active that who knows what's going to happen there. And so I think, we should both take pride in our own achievements, particularly this now long 7 rounds of elections in a row where we've made net gains in council elections. That's a really good winning streak that we're on, whilst also being aware of the huge challenge for future British politics in terms of the rise of reform.
Richard, I suppose one of the questions that might arise from someone, did reform do so well it actually stifled the Lib Dem results that may have been even better? Because I think I went into this thinking that the right-wing vote was going to be nicely split, but actually instead it was almost entirely gobbled up by reform.
Well, if you look at Durham, for example, where we've actually led the council from 4th place for 4 years, our number of seats effectively went up in a Labour area. And where did they come? Most of them came from the university area, the old Durham district, Durham City Council area. If you look in Exeter, another university town, we took a Labour seat there. And in fact, Labour lost all 7 seats. So I think that I've seen some charts, it might even have been from Mark, which relates the number of people with higher qualifications to Lib Dem and Reform vote. And that's why I'm really looking forward to next year's urban local elections and even more so to the Liverpool elections in 2027.
Hannah, what were your kind of first impressions? I know you were at the count with me in Preston and we were obviously getting lots of results here, seeing basically. I mean, I can talk about in Lancashire, where the Tories and Labour have had control of Lancashire for so long, been so dominant as the two big parties. The Tories reduced down to only 8, Labour reduced down to only 5. And we were saying every single Tory cabinet member, bar one, lost their seats, including the leader. The Labour opposition leader also lost. It was extraordinary. But what are your impressions?
Yeah, so I went over the hills to Lancashire for for the count, mainly to stop Councillor Potter from having a nervous breakdown when a tally sheet came in that only had 2 Liberal Democrat votes on it, because I knew he'd won. He won it by a country mile in the end, loads of flapping. But yeah, I am the chair of Yorkshire and Humber, so I guess really, like, I didn't have it wasn't a particularly good day for me, to be perfectly honest. So I spent most of my campaign in Hull and East Yorkshire, where we went on an absolutely epic campaign to try and win our first sort of combined authority mayor. Now, just because a contest is winnable and just because we work really, really hard doesn't always mean that we're going to win it, unfortunately. And that was the case. So, yeah, I want to start off by just saying commiserations to Mike Ross and all of the Hull and East Yorkshire team, because, they put in an absolutely spectacular shift. And as you said, John, I think we sort of went into that election on the assumption that the vote would split fairly equally and someone could win it on sort of 28% of the vote. Well, we got 28% of the vote, but unfortunately Reform got 35%, because that Labour and Conservative vote just absolutely disintegrated. So yeah, so a bit of a sad round of elections in Yorkshire. Unfortunately, obviously, we're delighted, for our colleagues around the country. I think the thing that really hit me about it was the way that so there's been a bit of a pie chart going round about, in the great scheme of things, Reform only run whatever it is, 7 councillors, and they've only got however many councillors they got elected last week. And in the great scheme of things, it's a very, very small percentage of local government. But we know how hard those county councils are to win. Those county councils have been either Conservative controlled or in no overall control for a really long time. Mark, you'll know better than me. Have the Lib Dems ever had majority outright control of a county council before?
So our previous peak was 3 county councils, but that was when there were more county councils. So we have the highest proportion ever. And yeah, the very fact that 3 was our peak shows how hard it's always been for us in
so hard to win. So even, I guess, similar to the Hull and East Yorkshire situation, they cover such big areas that even when we're really, really strong in parts of them, loads of councillors, district councils, even MPs, we've never before been able to translate that to winning the whole thing. And I think, the headlines weren't, I was saying this to John on Friday, the headlines coming through as, Starmer says he's disappointed by local election results. Well, what about the Conservatives? Even on a bad year, usually for the Conservatives, they would be able to keep either majority control or be the biggest party on all of those county councils, the vast majority of those county councils. So for Reform to be able to win, not just the number of councillors that they've had, they've obviously taken control of some unitaries as well. I think Northamptonshire West and North, I want to say, are smallish unitaries that they've taken. They've taken 2 mayoralties. Andrea Jenkins was a slam dunk, I think. But these are elections that really no one should have ever been able to win except the Conservatives. And it is absolutely staggering and a little bit terrifying, I think, to be honest, to see how they've swept to victory there. And I think there were going to be a few freshly elected people all of a sudden realising they've got a county council to run, given the knowledge of the sort of general public out on the street of what county councils do versus all the other types of councils. I think there's going to be a very steep learning curve for some of these.
Yeah, and we're going to get on to that about some of the consequences of these victories, particularly, one of the Reform councillors here in Lancashire, who is now responsible for education in the county, didn't know what SEND was, so this is going to be frightening for a lot of people, but also Lib Dems have got to step up to that challenge. But Shaff, your impressions of the night and the results?
Clearly, echo kind of Hannah's comments around Mike Ross being a fantastic candidate. But when the tide's against you, the tide is against you. And the tide was against us when we were taking on Labour last year. The tide was against some of us who were taking on reform. I mean, I have to ask some questions about the Labour campaign in the Hull and East Riding. You know, there were leaflets saying this contest between Labour and Reform, and where did Labour finish? Miles behind. They were pushing, they were absolutely pushing votes to Reform. So Labour need to take a long, hard look at themselves. Just closer to home, nearby, Doncaster, you know, for Labour to have dominated that, well, it used to be a town, now a city, for decades and decades. And 2/3 of the councillors now are Reform. The headline was that Ross Jones hung on by a fingertip, 600 votes. That was down to Nick Fletcher, the Conservatives MP in that area previously, who ran a good, decent campaign, but finished third. But if you look at the council results, so now Ross Jones, she's in the post, but she can't get a budget passed because there's more than 2/3 of the Reform councillors. So that's a tricky situation. And just going further south, across the border here, into Derbyshire, Chesterfield, there are no Labour councillors left. So this is weird. Chesterfield have a Labour MP who will no longer have any Labour councillors. And again, in some of those seats that we took, there was a by-election as well for Chesterfield Council. It used to be Labour held, and they came third. And thankfully, the Lib Dems won it. But so some huge seismic changes. Now, like you said, John, do the people coming into post realise what they're taking on? And it can't just be all about, oh, well, we're going to stop this flag and that flag going up in the town hall, as we've seen announced by Reform. That's not what voters really want. They want you to run their services, whatever they are, whether it's children's services, adult social care, whether it's waste management. You know, these are the sort of things that people now expect to see improvements. And I can see a lot of Reform people not realising that they're not MPs, they are county councillors, and will be getting incredibly frustrated. However, on the more positive side, I have to say the Liberal Democrats did really, really well. And I can't believe Mark's not mentioned it, so I'm going to steal his thunder. How important it is for us when we're at the count, not to stand in huddles, but actually to look at the bundles. Because I think it was in Cambridge where we were 2 behind and we ended up 10 ahead. And as a result, we are now likely to run that council. So that's a clear kind of anecdote there to take away for generations, I reckon, Mark, to say to everyone when you're doing that training about the count, this is not a social event. You have a job to do.
Yeah. There's another councillor, and I probably shouldn't give away the details of who they are or where they are, but they won by less than 20 votes, let's say, and they were gobsmacked that the person who finished second, who didn't ask for a recount. And, wow, you know, if you're ahead by a decent handful of votes, normally in a recount, you stay ahead. But, you know, the count is a serious place of work.
Yeah, that's because that the person that lost, the Reform candidate that lost, was their own agent as well as being a new candidate, so I had no clue what to do. But Richard, I kind of want to touch on, because it is because, you know, you've been around longer than I have, Richard, but I remember even in my short time in politics, when we've had big swings on some elections, and actually counties have often been a bit swingy because they've always been with European elections or general elections and things like that. But the absolute routing of the traditional parties in terms of Labour and the Tories, that hasn't happened before. That really, they've swung between each other. This is something new.
Go north to Durham. Durham, the area of mining, the Durham Miners Gala, which was Labour controlled, all led by men for 101 years. They lost power in 2021, but were still by far the biggest party. 4 councillors left in Durham. You go right the way down to the south, a county which, with one slight interlude, has been Tory since Adam was a lad. Kent, 5 councillors, Lib Dems doubled their seats and came up to be the official opposition on a county with 12 councillors, which good for them and good for our colleagues in Durham who are also the official opposition. But as you say, I've been around a long time and change has always been a bit more incremental than that. for 10 councils of that size, where council groups now run the council, in most cases with no council experience at all, is absolutely incredible. I know we're going to discuss it, but that's going to be very difficult. If I was feeling sorry for anyone now, apart from Lib Dems who could have won or should have won, it will be the 3 senior officers in each of those councils who are having to say what the law is and what the finances actually are.
Yeah, because some of the, well, we are going to get into that in a second, but it is really getting interesting as well how, because I can talk a little bit more with my Lancashire hat on because I know some of the ins and outs of it, but it is extraordinary the types of people that hung on. Like the Labour and Tory guys that hung on were all they were quite quietish councillors in the chamber, but really good community activists. Yeah, I'm thinking of the Tory guy that hung on in Polton. Everyone else lost, and this guy, he was the armed forces guy, former veteran. Actually, he was weird enough. He was involved with Ben Wallace, one of his kind of staffers, but someone who he wasn't flashy. He just knew his community and worked it. Likewise, a Labour councillor in Rosendale, she was like, does lots of stuff with kind of mums charities and stuff like that, and they hung on, and it's really interesting. But what's fascinating from the overall results is actually even independents didn't hold on that well, because you'd have thought that actually independents would have kind of had that kind of non-establishment kind of protection. They didn't. And you look at, I mean, we've talked about the Ashfield, beg your pardon, independents. They were nearly all but wiped out.
Yes, that's good. We like that.
Yeah, that's. I mean, but it's more the remarkable nature of how this happened, and why it happened. Now, Mark, we've seen some of the press releases about the Lib Dems have questioned the mail shots by reform. I was trying to calculate roughly how much that would have cost just in Lancashire, and it would have been extraordinary. But obviously, that was massive pumping of money by central reform. And also this kind of leads into a conversation we had about reform getting their act together on candidates as well. Their HQ is clearly getting geared up for good things for their point of view in terms of electioneering.
I think yes and no, because certainly reform did an impressive job at finding and getting successfully nominated so many candidates in such short order, and we shouldn't be complacent about that at all. But my goodness, so many of the candidates they let through have got really questionable public records in terms of and they've already, the councillors just elected on Thursday haven't yet formally taken up post, and they've already had to suspend one of them from the party because of things that she had said. And in fact, she's also Donna Edmonds. She's also said all sorts of unpleasant things and been a cheerleader for Tommy Robinson. None of which was enough for reform to suspend her, but it was her talking about defecting to a sort of Rupert Lowe further fringe party that was the final straw for them. So I think they do face quite a lot of challenges, but we shouldn't be, I think, complacent or condescending about that, because they delivered lots of literature by spending lots of money, but we know how we react to other parties when other parties have a go at us over, oh, you just deliver loads of leaflets. That's a legitimate, respectable part of political campaigning, putting lots of leaflets through people's letterboxes, and reform may have the ability to do it with money while we rely more on volunteers. But our response to that shouldn't be to sort of cry foul. It should be to redouble our efforts to go out and find more volunteer deliverers so we can sort of match and exceed them.
So why, in the opinion of the panel, I'll come to Hannah first, but I'm really interested in everyone's kind of opinion. Why did the Lib Dems do so well? So even in places, I mean, I can talk about my little area in Preston where we came top really in the city, but across the country, Lib Dems were able to bat this back. So why was that, Hannah? Was it a type of demographic? Was it our type of campaigning? Why did the Lib Dems do all right?
So the impression that I get is that it's because as you said, this was such a massive kind of like anti-establishment party election, and for all we are the third party in the House of Commons, we are we're very markedly by the media, not one of the top parties. So I think where there was a hardworking, really thorough ground campaign promoting the Liberal Democrats as the alternative, not across the board, but by and large, those Liberal Democrat candidates were successful. So the example I know that we did lose a couple of councillors in Leicestershire that we've had since the 1980s. One of the Blaby seats and one of the Wigston seats. Maybe that's because we've had those seats for so long that they're seen as the establishment, and so therefore, the anti-establishment vote went against because they both went to Reform. But we've sort of known this in the past that we can outwork them. And for all, Mark has said, they've paid for literature rather than delivering it by hand. Part of the reason we deliver by hand is because we can get more bang for our buck. So we would rather hand deliver 6 leaflets than have one paid for drop, because that one paid for just doesn't get our message across. And it appears that it does for Reform. They don't need the volume in the same way that we do. So the impression I get is that where we worked, we presented a good, viable, credible alternative to the Tories and or Labour. People voted for us, and that's why we were so successful in picking off individual wards. Obviously in Cambridgeshire, Oxfordshire, Shropshire, we did that in big enough numbers to take control of the council, but that's a long planned campaign. That wasn't a fluke. They've been looking to take control of those councils and working on that for years now. Whereas in places where there are no Lib Dems, to sort of spread that vote out, if you like. So Doncaster is a good example of this. Whole unitary council up for election. We did stand some candidates this year. We stood 14 out of 55, which for anyone who knows Doncaster knows that is a miracle. And we also stood a candidate in the mayoral for the first time ever there. But there was never a serious credible campaign, if you like. They were sort of largely paper candidates. So where the Lib Dems aren't there to kind of provide that alternative, the neither of the above vote just deflected pretty much en masse to Reform. John's right, independents lost their seats as well. The Greens didn't do particularly well. I think the elections that we had this time around, you wouldn't necessarily expect the Greens to do brilliantly in other than the West of England mayor. But yeah, I think there's always, most places have a donkey vote, don't they? So we know in Barnsley, as a general rule, if we do nothing, Labour will win. That's the donkey vote. That's where it goes. On most of these counties, for years and years and years, if there isn't an alternative working hard, the donkey vote will just go Tory. The whole donkey vote has just gone Reform this time, except where Lib Dem's working.
And so do you think, Richard and Shaff, I'll go Richard first, that it's about establishing credibility for Lib Dems? And I think some of the counties where we did most well, obviously established credibility because they had the MPs now. So we kind of switched the kind of Lib Dem pattern where it was gain local government, then get the MP. This time we got the MP and now we've carried on into local government.
Well, long may that last, or perhaps we don't want that to happen. I look back 10 years to when I was the only Lib Dem elected in Liverpool, and we'd had so many bad elections for the 3 years before, we thought that was a major victory. We all went out to the pub and celebrated. So first of all, we are seen as the challengers always. And my hope is that in the council that I'm helping into control from opposition, they will always be the opposition party, in this case to the government. So it's very easy to become, I am the chair, I am the leader, I am the this, I am the that. So you get the gritty determination of a handful, but no doubt at all that in places like Shropshire, they were helped by the surge to us. And one of the reasons for that is not only having elected an MP there for the first time, but I think that the party nationally is trading on the right issues. And therefore, where we have a chance of winning, that's reinforced. The type of people who want to vote for us don't like Donald Trump. The type of people who want to vote for us do like Europe. Labour is going the wrong way on those issues. And that also applies to the Tories who might like to vote for us, who don't like Trump and do like Europe. So I think we're selling the right messages nationally. And that is reinforced then by the local work and any local surges you can produce because of circumstance of parliamentary elections.
Shaff, what are your impressions on why the Lib Dems had such a good night?
I think Richard just touched on one of the points I was going to make, in particular about the Durham results in the more university bits, and also Cambridge. That these were areas that we lost after the 2010 coalition and tuition fees and that sort of stuff. So it's interesting. I am absolutely adamant that despite these being local elections, there were national issues and international issues at play. And absolutely, Richard's on the button there, that we have come out strong, Ed Davey in particular, but also our other colleagues in Parliament have been pretty strong, whether it's been in the Lords or actually in the House of Commons around Trump and tariffs and the sort. And people have been seeing Labour, and they've been pretty weak. When you look at our Liberal colleague in Canada, Mark Carney, and how he took on Trump from, let's be honest, a very losing position in January, where the Liberals looked like they were going to get a thumping. Mark Carney stood up strong and against Trump, and it's shown, and it came through. Starmer isn't doing that. Similarly, you would have thought the Greens would have done a lot better in the West Country, having got an MP and being pretty dominant in Bristol. They didn't come second, they came third. So next time round, I think when this comes up again, I think Labour's going to have a pretty decent squeeze message, isn't it? It's between us and Reform. And this time, with the West Country, they might get more traction. But for me, also, it shows that we can go forward. The highlight is, yes, Reform have done well, but the next biggest party was the Liberal Democrats. I've been to 3 Asian weddings yesterday. 3. I wonder how many people.
I'm amazed. I'm amazed you're still awake, Shaff.
Yeah, and I didn't eat any food at 2 of them, so it was more of a photo shoot. But anyway, look, there was a lot of talk about the Liberal Democrats among some people about, my God, you did well. And I said, yes, the 2 establishment parties, the Conservatives have been in government and the Labour Party, everyone's disappointed. Kemi Bednott's not really cutting it. Long may she continue as leader. And Starmer has messed up. I said, how on earth can he take the winter fuel off pensioners, keep a 2-child benefit cap, and hammer small businesses with NI increase and think there's going to be no consequences? Now, so many of these Labour councillors and MPs have kept quiet. And Hannah, refers to the kind of donkey vote. In a sense, it's the saying around South Yorkshire is you could stick a rosette on a donkey and people will vote for it. Well, Hannah, I think people have started to realise that they don't have to do that. And our challenge is, can we get them to vote for a more liberal alternative rather than the more extreme, Reform? And clearly, we didn't have a track record in Doncaster, hence why Reform did well there. But where we do have a track record, and I'm just going to point to the 2 by-elections that we had in South Yorkshire, and I'll talk about Hannah's Dodduff. We had a good result there, despite Reform doing well and Labour tanking, because we had a track record and we did stuff. So I'm looking forward to next year's elections in the Mets, as Richard said, because if Labour can't improve the economy, and I'm not sure how they're going to improve the economy, then we have got a huge opportunity to, 1, win more council seats, and 2, Mark's still the president, to say to any, ambitious Liberal Democrat who wants to be elected to the House of Commons, this is your year, starting from today, to get out there and show us that you are serious about winning. And I think that includes London, Mark, as well as other areas. Because I'm really excited this next year now. Because Labour, having hollowed out in places like Doncaster, what are they going to do when the general election comes and there is no councillors now? Because they've had all up, so that's 4 years. So that's going to be in and around the general election period where Ed Miliband and others will have to defend their seats without barely any councillors. They've got, 12 left in Doncaster. That's 4 wards. That's all they've got.
You brought us on perfectly, Shaff, as we now move on to the consequences of what's happened. And I want to ask the panel for a one-word answer, because I think we all agree that probably the Tories had the worst night, given that it was probably the worst performance ever by an opposition party. But who is more scared of this result going forward? Is it Labour or the Tories? Hannah?
I would say Labour, because as Richard and Shaff have said, all the Mets are up next year.
Okay. Richard, Labour or Tories more scared?
I'm afraid I'm hedging it Labcon, because they both lost 2/3 of their seats.
Honestly, politicians. Shaff?
I'm not going to do a Kemp. Labour. Labour have got more to lose in the Mets and also the 400 plus MPs they've got.
Mark?
You're all wrong. Tories. The reason I say that is if you're Labour, there is a route out of the hole that you're in, which is run the national government successfully. Now, that's not an easy route, but fundamentally, if they manage to get economic growth going, real wages rising, public services improving, there's get the heart of what you're meant to be doing in government right, and political benefits will flow to them. If you're the Tories, though, I mean, oppositions, as we've discovered ourselves after 2015, for example, if you're out of government, it's very, very hard to recover. And that's why it's so often, when you've had Labour after 1990, after sort of, all of those Tory wins running up to 1992, it had taken them a long time, several attempts to get back to winning in 97. It then took the Tories quite a few attempts after the William Hague and Duncan Smith, etc., to get back to nearly winning in 2010. I think it's a long, hard road back for oppositions very often. And the Tories now face not only that, but the existential danger of reform. So I think that, with Labour, at least you can think, there's a plan here that we can follow, and if we get it right, it'll, cut things will get better for us. For the Tories, it's a much, much bleaker outlook.
And I suppose the Tories have two more established flanks to be hurt as well. So you've got Reform very established on one side, and the Lib Dems now on the kind of moderate side, because a party strategy, and Ed been very clear he wants to finish the job in taking out the Tories, Mark.
Yeah. Exactly. And in a way, Labour face a similar risk. But with Labour, they can at least think that if we get the economy going better, that will appeal to people across the board. So Labour, because they're in power, can have a plan if they wish. And actually, it sounds like they might not go for this, but, if they wish, they can have a plan that appeals to both of their vulnerable flanks. If you're not in power, though, having a plan that appeals to both vulnerable flanks is really hard, because you can't demonstrate that, look, we've made your lives better, which appeals across the board, because you're in opposition. You don't have the power to do that. So, yeah, I think you're all wrong. The Tories should be most scared.
Well, that's you all told anyway, and because it's a joint podcast, I can't possibly criticise.
We haven't heard your one-word response yet, Mr. Potter.
My word, I think the Tories as well. To be honest, I think we talked about this before the election. I think it's really noticeable how they're not in the conversation, the Tories, and I'm not sure how they get back. And that will go on then, Hannah. She's coming. She wants to stop me going.
Have you got a secret plan for Tory revival, Hannah?
No, it's not. It's not a plan. It's more of an observation. I think the thing that we all need to bear in mind is how volatile politics is at the minute. So I've been sort of cautioning people locally on I guess kind of like drawing too many solid conclusions from this round of results, and sort of saying, oh well, therefore we must, or this tells us something really concrete. Because if this round of elections had been 12 months ago, the results would have been completely, totally different.
Yeah, Labour would have taken Lancashire instead of Reform.
Absolutely. They'd have won the Hull and East Yorkshire mayor. It would have been, they'd have probably kept the Cambridgeshire mayor. It would have been a completely different set of results. And it's literally just been 12 months that has all changed so much. And I will always say that the Tories are never dead. Like their ability to come back is absolutely astonishing. And I'm not necessarily saying that Reform are or aren't here to stay, but I think the thing that we need to probably learn going forward is how kind of agile we need to be, because who we kind of pitch the election against, and who the sort of biggest threat is and how we target our campaigns. I think if we kind of put this set of election results firmly in our head and decide that that's definitely what's going to happen going into next year, I suspect there's going to be another twist, to be honest, and we're going to be surprised again.
I think that's a really important point. Again, if you think of 4 years ago, where the country, we've had one of our fourth prime ministers since 4 years ago, and where Boris was at that time, and that fight we had in 2021. But Richard, I think it's really interesting because I think most of the panel will agree, but I don't want to speak for you. That I think we know which way Baynock's going to go. She is going to try and tack to the right to defend that flank, which leaves opportunities to the Lib Dems. Where Labour goes is a lot more interesting. And I don't know, you guys might not have seen it because it's a Lancashire, but the Lancashire MP for Clitheroe and Pendle, or Pendle and Clitheroe, I can't remember which way it's supposed to be, has basically come out and he's called for an immigration freeze of a one-in, one-out policy to potentially leave the ECHR, to shut down all asylum hotels, a cap on refugees. I mean, the most barking kind of right-wing kind of fodder. And he's decided to do that. Now, Richard, if Labour go down that route, I see that as catastrophic for them, because why would anyone vote Labour when they can just have Reform saying the exact same things?
Well, I think the reason I think that Labour are the most to worry about is I've never seen a party so quickly offend its core voters. Shaff's already mentioned it. The two-child cap, the attack on pensioners in a variety of ways. And in a place like Liverpool, that has really hit home. So in some ways, that's a second order matter for most people in a place like Liverpool. The first order is what hits their pocket and the perception of them being another Tory party. They're not too bothered about asylum seeker hostels compared to what happens every day in their lives. And the depth of disillusionment in this city against Labour is unbelievable. Our task here is to make sure that we reap the benefits of it by being good local councillors, good potential city council leaders. But I just can't see a way back for Labour now.
Well, Shaff, it must be on, Mark kind of alluded to it, it has to be the economy. So the reason why immigration was less of a problem during Blair and Brown is because the economy was going well. When people are feeling hard done by or are feeling like life isn't where it should be, they look for someone to blame. And when you've got someone as skilled as Farage, and whatever we think of Farage, he is skilled at messaging, saying, your life is crap, blame that person. That is basically very hard. That's a lot easier to do when times are tough.
Yeah, absolutely. And the economy, yes, we might have some control over some of it, but as we've seen with Trump, and we've seen with the war in the Middle East and the war in Ukraine, and the potential war that many people are probably not seeing between India and Pakistan, knowing how huge India is and the economy is, but also how big Pakistan is. So these are all factors outside the control of Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves that, as Mark says, yes, there's a route for them to come out of it. I get that, Mark. But the route is quite choppy and they don't have all the controls. And I honestly think that just talking to people, and yeah, it might be that I'm in Sheffield and we don't have any Tories to beat, so maybe my view is a bit narrow. But I think some of these people, some of the councillors that, the seats that are being lost, it's going to take a long time to get back. And the Labour Party, in some places, has been hollowed out. They had a huge surge in membership with Corbyn, so they had the infighting. A lot of that's gone. And it's clear that, talking to a Labour friend, they said that in Doncaster, they just didn't have the bodies on the ground. They were begging people from Sheffield and Rotherham to come and help them. That's great. We can, Sheffield and Rotherham can go across and help. But if you don't have your troops on the ground doing the work during the week, not just at weekends when your help comes from outside. So I think Labour, as Richard says, has got off to a very, very bad start. And I think once people get out of the habit of not voting for you at a local election, then that journey to vote for something else becomes easier. And I think that's the problem Labour see coming down the line. And like you say, I think the Tories have got a problem. Which way they're going to turn, because whichever way they turn, they've either been squeezed by the Reform Party on the hard right, and the more moderate centrists are looking at the Liberal Democrats more and more. And I think the more moderate and centrists in the Labour Party will also be looking at the Liberal Democrats. So I think there's some difficult times for both Starmer and Badenoch. And I don't know, what's the bets of both of them being leaders into the next general election?
I don't know those odds, but it's an interesting question that I can't imagine they ever get rid of Starmer, but we'll see. But one thing, really good practical point that Shaff's just raised, it's really useful. I checked my Lighthouse account for my local party. I've had a good number of new members and supporters join since Thursday's elections. So for all those local parties out there...
One of my final acts as leader of the Lib Dem group here in Sheffield Council, which comes to an end on Tuesday, tomorrow, I've sent out an email, quite a personal email, about to people, particularly in right across the city, really. And we've seen a good trickle of responses back to that email, but also encouraging people to join. So yeah, you're right. I think it's times like this. For me, it feels a little bit not as strong, but as similar to 2016, when people had a bit of a shock to the system and people realised, oh my God, look what's happening. I can't sit back anymore. I need to join a political party. And that's when people joined the Liberal Democrats in big numbers. Now, I'm not saying we're going to get the huge spike in membership that we got in 2016, but the door is open for people to come and join us. And our challenge is to kind of grow that membership, and let's aim for, a full slate of candidates for next year's elections should be high up there for us all.
And to me, it seems more like 1974, actually. Sorry, does no one else
know,
remember?
Richard. I was minus.
Richard. I've just been reading about 1970.
Oh, well, there you go. Yeah, I mean, just those elections were incredible, going to places, pointing up a candidate and getting 25%. Unfortunately, we got 25% everywhere and didn't win. But the feeling that you had then after the Ely, the Ripon, the other by Alan Beath getting in by, what was it, 60 or something, all those, there was such a real swing at that time. It just feels like that to me.
That's really interesting. So, I mean, we've got to talk about the impact. All of us have been heavily involved in local government and what the impact of this might mean, because it is, we talk about party politics and shifting in power, but ultimately, I think most of us get into politics because we want to do right by our areas. Now, there is an extremely sense of fear amongst about having such huge, important councils being run by people who have no experience. And we talked a little bit about before with some a Reform candidate near me didn't have a clue what SEND was in terms of education. Mark's alluded to someone's already been suspended from Reform. There are a lot of people that will have been elected, because I'm absolutely sure Reform won't have expected all these candidates to win. And we know, being realistic, some of these candidates we put in as paper candidates, you think, well, they're all right as a paper candidate, probably wouldn't want them to be elected. That's the truth of it. And now lots of these people not only are elected, but actually in a position of power. And I think that is extremely scary for a lot of areas. So, we'll go to Richard first for this, but Richard, what should Lib Dems now do in that scrutiny role? Because also, you think of somewhere like, I'm going to use Lancashire as an example. So Reform now have 53 councillors in Lancashire. No other party is above single figures. So that is a very difficult place for any opposition party to be in, because they've got such low numbers. So what should Lib Dems or any other opposition parties listening, hello, by the way, but in particular, the Lib Dems, what should they be doing to make sure that problems do not occur?
Well, first of all, I think the most important line of defence in those councils are the statutory officers. When you listen to the barking mad rubbish that's coming out of some of these people, not only do they not know, I think a lot of them don't want to know. I listened to Darren Grimes on Radio 4, and what he was going to do was put auditors in. They're all going to put auditors in To do what? Doesn't he know there are internal and external auditors? Doesn't he know that 70% of his council's budget is spent on adult and children's social care? If you could suck out all the DEI money, which I don't think you should took out, it'd be worth threepence halfpenny on anyone's budget, but they don't know that. What should we be doing? Well, if there's 5 of you, my first advice is don't spend too much time in County Hall. I remember describing the progress that Hull made all those years ago. They were down to 1 who popped in and out. They went up to 7, and they were guerrilla force, raising pertinent issues in the committee, making sure the press heard about it, and then disappearing. Then they went up to 20-ish, I can't remember the numbers, and they had to be prepared to be the opposition in waiting and be responsible and be there and make statements on everything. And then they won. So there's a process. But 5 of you on a county, pick your issues, perhaps 3 or 4, ones that will resonate with people, and just bang and bang and bang away on those issues.
Mark?
Yeah, I think we need to be careful not to make some of the mistakes that were made around the referendum, and particularly people's reactions after the Brexit referendum, of looking down on and sounding like we think that people who voted the other way are all racist idiots, because that's not the case in terms of everyone who voted for reform. And so I think it's important that there will be lots of examples of reform councillors doing outrageous or shambolic or incompetent things, which we absolutely should get stuck into with our campaigning, but need to always distinguish that from what we're saying about the public as a whole. Because, yeah, there's a chunk of people who voted reform who have, from our point of view, really repellent views we wouldn't want to touch with a barge pole. But actually, there's also a chunk of people who voted reform because they're angry and upset and frustrated. And given the right local Lib Dem campaigner, achieving the right things in their community, actually, they are people whose votes we can win over and need to win over. Yeah. And you only can do that if you show that you're respecting them rather than looking down on them.
Shaff?
I mean, look, they've come onto the back of change. Starmer came onto the back of change, and the change that Starmer's delivered is not what people wanted. And similarly, I think both as Richard and Mark's alluded to, I think we need to just keep an eye on the change that they're going to bring. And I think we just keep highlighting it, and they will, when they realise that they can't stop the boats and they can't do this, they can't do that. Like, so some of them are saying we're not going to house any asylum seekers in our area. Well, when you've got private landlords who are being offered 5-year contracts to the Home Office, I'm not really sure what a local city county councillor can actually do about it. So some of the pledges that are being made have been totally outrageous. And a little bit says to me, sometimes people might have to experience some of these parties to realise why they shouldn't touch it with the barge pole. And therefore, like Mark, I don't look down or sneer upon people. People want to change. Starmer failed to deliver it. Then look somewhere else. And in some places, we've offered that change. And other places where we've not had the, history of being active, they've gone to reform because that was been a default position because of the media and everything. They're now in position of authority. They're in position of power. Let's see how they exercise that power. And as Richard says, I won't be spending too much time in your county hall, John, or anywhere else. Because ultimately, you should be there out in the community, doing the community work, doing all the stuff that Lib Dems do, knocking on doors, leading campaigns, and to say this is what the people of Lancashire want or Preston want or anywhere else that we've got Liberal Democrats elected, Cambridge, etc. Devon in particular, by the way, was a fantastic result. I know we've been talking a lot about North, but Devon was pretty good in terms of where we've got MPs. I mean, that's the other standout thing for me, has been where we've had MPs. We've done reasonably well. And I only think, and we've not mentioned it, what might have happened if we had actually had results, elections in places that had elections cancelled.
Yeah. Like Surrey, places like that. Yeah, absolutely. Hannah, your thing. So again, what kind of effect do you think this is going to have on kind of the way local government works?
I mean, the potential effects are horrifying, are they? And I do feel sorry for some of these officers, because a lot of these county councils have been fairly stable, and we know that officers like a stable council without too much political flux. And this is significant political flux. I mean, it's entirely possible that in some cases the politicians will just sort of largely wash their hands of it and just be led, by the officers who just sort of tell them what to do, and it's fairly business as usual. That's probably a best case scenario, really. But bearing in mind that these authorities are responsible for children's social care, they're responsible for adult social care. This is the kind of stuff that makes those of us, not me, thankfully, I'm in opposition, but any Lib Dem who is in charge in local government, this is the stuff that keeps you up at night, really. Because if there's there's been a big failure at Barnsley Council recently, the bins have hardly been emptied for, weeks on end, similarly in Birmingham. But when there's a failure in children's social care, kids die. And that is what it comes down to. And I hope it doesn't come down to that. Yeah. But that is what these councils are in charge of. So I think for Lib Dems, and what do these teams need to do? John's going to love this answer, because you need to get back out on the doorsteps. Because what I heard from John, what I felt myself campaigning in Hull and East Yorkshire, what I've heard from all around the country was that these reform voters were just not coming up in our canvassing. And whereas we used to have, sort of shy Tories, people I think are now quite reasonably saying, well, if someone won't say, if they refuse, if they say they're undecided, if they're sort of reasonably polite but not particularly committal, they're probably voting reform. And so I'm sort of used to Barnsley reform voters, to be honest, who are generally quite happy to tell me that they're voting reform and quite happy to tell me why they're voting reform. But that's not the case across the country. And I wonder if we need to quite specifically and quite sympathetically start saying to voters, did you vote reform?
And I think that's a really good point.
What do you think? How's it going? But do that kindly and sympathetically, and allow people to say, well, this is why I did it, and this is what I'm hoping for, and this is why I might change my mind next time.
And not judgmentally is the key thing, that. And I suppose what's really good. So I love canvassing, as most people who listen to this know. And actually, after the general election, it's a really good time to ask people, which way did they go? Because a previous vote is a far easier kind of question to get an answer to than one for a future election. And what Hannah's alluded to is really important. So I could tell you about the campaign I did. So Reform were maybe getting about 8% in our canvassing. And actually, we knew that was too low. We knew that was going to be higher than that. So what we started to do was anyone who was refused, anyone that said not Lib Dem, half of all the people that said they might vote Lib Dem, assume all of them go into Reform. And that put Reform at around 20% in my seat. Now, in reality, even with that approach, Reform ended up getting 30% in my seat. So whatever we do, you've got to be knowledgeable to know that you've got to be prepared for the worst almost, and that's what we did in Preston, and we were able to get across the line. So, and sometimes we had to be really ruthless and just say we'd have loved to have tied for a 5th seat in Preston, but we knew we couldn't push ourselves, and it's better to win 3 than actually or just lose all of them, for example. But I suppose a very quick round, because one of the things that is coming up is local government reorganisation, very much an issue for Lib Dems. Now, one of the first questions one of my councillors asked me after these results is, do you think Labour is going to press ahead now with local government reorganisation? Now, for me, in my patch, I can see Labour not wanting elections next year. I think if they think we could put it off and cancel those elections in 2026 for our districts, and then it puts it off to 27, maybe Reform will make more mistakes, the shine will come off a little bit. I can see that being really tempting to the government. But Mark, what are your impressions around, will this affect local government reorganisation plans, or do you think it's a non-starter?
I don't know, it's hard to tell, because I think the Labour government has been surprisingly unpolitical about quite a lot of these things, and I guess maybe one should perhaps give them a little bit of credit for that. But things like moving back to a preferential voting system for mayor elections which would have been justifiable in terms of the public good. You know, having somebody win on 25% of the vote is not first past the post working well, but also would have probably played to Labour's self-interest. They don't seem to be motivated, oddly, for a party that, you know, seems to be all about Morgan McSweeney and the focus on winning and all of that. They don't seem to be very joined up in terms of thinking about, well, we've got these government decisions that affect how elections are run, what's in our self-interest. So I don't know.
Okay. Anyone else on the panel got an opinion on local government reorganisation? Go on, Shaff.
Given what they've seen, a bloodbath in places like Doncaster, where you had all-up elections, yes, it might seem on paper to be a right thing to do technically, right? But politically, do you want to be wiped out in places? Yeah. I think someone political is going to have to get a grip in the Labour Party. And Starmer, being the Director of Public Prosecutions, might not be the most political mind around, but somebody surely in the Labour Party who should be saying, just watch what's just happened in Durham and elsewhere in Lincolnshire, where, you know, Reform have got the mayor, they've got the county council. Is that what we want to see, Mark, too? Because that's what they're staring at.
You're saying they shouldn't do the reorganisation.
I think just from a political point of view, it might, it might be on paper for civil service to say this is the practical thing to do and it's the right thing to do. But politically, all they're going to do is give Reform and us a much more, much more opportunities to win. Because when all your councils, instead of having thirds like the districts, the Mets are going to have next year, yeah, some of them, right? They're going to have every council up for election. So in Sheffield, we've got 27 up. But if you had 84 up and you had the results that we've seen on Thursday, the Labour Party will be absolutely smashed to bits.
That's really interesting. It's gone Richard and then Hannah.
Yeah, well, first of all, local government reorganisation is total bollocks anyway. I'm working in 2 councils which have been reorganised 3 years ago. The savings were mythical, all produced by private sector consultants who made a fortune out of talking this nonsense. It takes years to make the culture work. It takes years to change the organisation. And if you do that, it distracts you from the vital jobs of delivering the services. But if Labour go ahead with the reorganisations they're talking about in the southwest, where they lost every seat, for example, in Devon, they will be out of existence for a very, very long time to come. I think they will find and should find reasons to backpedal. It doesn't work, and it's going to kill them.
Wow. Okay. This is probably a whole other podcast to talk about that, because I actually disagree with Richard, but we haven't got time for that right now. But Hannah,
I mean, I wasn't sure that the proposed government reorganisations were ever in the Labour Party's best interest, really, even before this Reform surge. You know, all of the kind of county mirror unitaries that the Tories created, like, all fell Tory anyway. So it never really made a lot of sense to me. But I think one of the things Shaff's sort of alluded to there is that, so Barnsley Council, which is obviously a unitary Met on thirds, has got all ups next year because of boundary changes. And they have proposed, and all of the mood music has been signalling that they are intending on switching to all ups on a permanent basis, which, I mean, when they first came out with it, I was like, have you all completely lost their minds? I mean, they ran that consultation until the 1st of May. I've assumed to wait and see what happened in Doncaster. I mean, who knows what they'll do, but I think it would be absolute political suicide of them to stick with all ups after next May.
The reorganisation doesn't necessarily mean all ups. That's an important thing to say. They can choose to not do it. But anyway, we'll see. There's all sorts of detail to come out about that. So a complete split view in the panel then a little bit on whether that what I mean. So again, we will probably have to have some of the council leaders that have gone through reorganisation, whether that's Dorset, Cumbria, Somerset, some of the places that have done it relatively recently, to come and have a chat about what they think should happen and what the effects will be. So I'm going to finish off tonight's episode.
Can I just show you a new friend I made yesterday?
No, it's going to be a puppet, isn't it, again? Honestly, we invite him back on. Come on.
This chap
I was hoping for
was given to me yesterday by the Sri Lankan community. And the fact he's sticking your tongue out is definitely not a message from me to anyone watching this pod today. But isn't that beautiful?
It is.
For those listeners, Richard has been the Lord Mayor of the great city of Liverpool, and he has very much enjoyed being the spokesperson for that wonderful city and meeting so many incredible people. But talking about incredible people, Lib Dems next year. Okay, we have big elections in Wales, in Scotland, in London, and across the country. We've seen what's happened this week. What is your advice to Lib Dems to get ready for next year? Because one of the things we talked about why these things happen and why Lib Dems won in some place and didn't others. I think Lib Dems that started early won far more seats, and you don't know what's coming. You won't have the data in your databases, in your Connect, about all these reform voters. So you need to be able to, if you haven't got your mark registers from the general election, you've got a couple of months to do that. Get them ordered and get them in your system so you know who likely voters are. But we'll go to Hannah first. What should Lib Dems do to get prepared for next year?
I think they need to not obsess over this set of results. I know we've just talked about it for an hour, but they can listen to this while they're delivering some leaflets. As Lib Dems, we love to navel gaze, don't we? And pontificate and what conclusions can we possibly draw from this?
That's the whole purpose of this podcast, Hannah. Yeah, for 5 years.
Navel gazing is good sometimes.
But if you've got elections next year, you need to get out and do the work. Whatever the answer to beating reform, arguing about it in WhatsApp groups and Facebook groups is not the answer. Not doing work is never the answer. So get out there and just get on and crack on. Do the work. Don't get all hung up on it. Just go and do your work.
Is there any election result that would have resulted in you saying something different from that, Hannah?
No, Mark, because that is always the answer. Go and deliver your leaflets. Go and knock on your doors. Go and do the work. Stop whining on the internet.
Shaff.
Yeah, and get your candidates chosen early. I can tell you that we don't have elections next year, but effectively we've already adopted something like 35 candidates for 2027, and they've been working, most of them, for the last year. But please, perhaps we could have a couple of by-elections in Liverpool. Would be nice.
Absolutely. He jumped in front of you there, Shaff, but we'll let him because it's his first time back.
Lord Mayor and all that.
Lord Mayor.
I'm used to it, dear boy.
Look, I think he's right about selecting your candidates. If you're serious, you've got elections next year, you need your candidates by the summer.
Yeah.
Not already. I think you need candidates who want to win. There's no point, going, I'll give it a go, but not really, I'm not sure I can win. Those who want to win, park their tanks on the opposition lawn. And as I said previously, there is competition. I'm just going to pick on London because it's the big election. There are other players on the pitch now. The Greens potentially could do some damage to Labour if they're the only opposition. The Reform Party in some bits of London may be able to make some ground. And one surefire way of them doing well will be for us to do nothing. So if you want to make sure you stop the Greens or Reform in particular, then the Lib Dems have to be that alternative. Because if they aren't, then the default people who are upset and angry by the change that Starmer promised has not been delivered will by default turn to Reform. And if you don't want to wake up this time next year to a shed load of reforms in our Mets, I strongly suggest to people, get out there and start working now and campaign on national and international issues, particularly if you're in a university seat area or you're in a so-called Guardian reading area. They're the sort of things. Yes, they're local elections, but some people sometimes just will vote on national and international issues. So, we have the formula: anti-Trump, anti-tariff, pro-European, internationalist, standing up for human rights and civil liberties. All that sort of stuff will appeal to a certain group of people that are probably not being our key target audience as the coalition. Now is the time.
See, that's really interesting. We should definitely do an episode on that because I am remorselessly just stay local. but actually there is an opportunity here for us to expand into it, like the MPs do on sewage and what else. So no, that's really, really interesting. And Mark, final word to you. What should Lib Dems be doing to get ready for next year?
So I think one of the things we've been most successful at in the last few years is focusing in on what's actually under our control to influence. It's really easy in politics to get into talking about, well, we should put this issue at the top of the agenda or whatever, when actually the public get to choose what's at the top of the agenda. And it's so rare to find any example of any party that's not in government actually managing to change what issues the public says matter most to them. So focus on what's under our control. What levers have we got? And I think the answer to that, for looking at the local elections for next year and the Scottish and Welsh elections as well, is very much find the people who are going to be great candidates, get them in place early, and build the local team. Because actually, I think one of the secrets of success in lots of places was the council candidate who had built up a delivery network so they could spend more time talking direct to voters on the doorstep. There's some amazing examples of really split wards where you see the person who came through from the Lib Dem side was the one who had been able to spend the most time talking to voters, embedding themselves as not just a great Lib Dem campaigner, but as an individual that people personally related to. So get your candidates in place and get building that local team. Loads of people did it in the run up to this year's elections. And wow, what a fantastic set of results so many of them pulled off.
Lovely. And so that's a lovely message to end on. And we just want to say, from Buckinghamshire to Worcestershire, thank you very much, all those Lib Dems that put in that shoe leather, that wore themselves out, and have spent this bank holiday in some sort of zombie state like I have, only rescued by the fact I got a new puppy, which I thought it was going to be a terrible idea the week before the election to get a puppy. A day after the election is also fairly rough to get a new puppy as well. but have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your week. Thank you very much to Mark, Hannah, Shaff and Richard for coming on. There'll be lots of comments, no doubt. We've had lots of discussions about future episodes we could do in this relating to what we're going to come next. But well done, everyone. Have a break. Make sure you recharge those batteries, and we'll be back with more episodes very, very soon. Thank you.